What family secret was finally spilled in your family? Found out my uncle is actually my brother. My mom had him when she was so young that my grandparents raised him. My sister cheated on her husband throughout her entire marriage to the point that all three of her kids have different biological fathers. When my mother fell ill and I took over her finances, I found thousands of pounds of gambling debt on her credit cards. Then I found adoption papers for a child she'd had before me that she'd never mentioned. Then another family member told me my dad didn't die in a car crash but committed suicide in prison. My great-great-grandfather was exiled and banned from Missouri for being a sheep thief. After my grandfather passed, we found out he had fathered a child when he was posted in Italy during World War II. He never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met and married my grandmother and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think we have a whole Italian family out there. Thanks for the awards. To clarify, I'm in the UK, not that it's relevant to the story. My oldest aunt is 77, so this kid would be at least 79 by now, I would think. We've considered doing the DNA testing, but some family members aren't comfortable with how those companies could use the information. It's a really sad story, but if his mother hadn't intercepted the letters, I wouldn't exist. It's a weird place to be in emotionally. My aunt wasn't my grandfather's child. He met my granny when my aunt was a very sick infant. She had polio and wasn't expected to survive. My granddad married my granny so she could get on his insurance and move to an area that had proper medical support. My aunt was the first infant to survive open heart surgery at Yale New Haven Hospital, and although she had to be in leg braces most of her childhood, she had a great, although not long enough, life. My granddad loved her like she was his own, and I never knew until she went to her bio dad's funeral when I was a teenager. Editing to say, thank you to everyone who shared their family stories or left a comment. I've spent the whole evening reminiscing and sharing stories I haven't really told in a long time, and that really means a lot. Thank you so much to everyone who's given an award or left an upvote. I haven't been able to comment on everyone's stories, but I've read them all and deeply appreciate them. This has been the highlight of my week. My grandmother recently died. She was famous in our town for her amazing cooking/catering, in particular her turkey dinners. Notably, her gravy was absolutely amazing. So delicious. She had a heart attack several years ago when her near-death experience convinced her to share some of her secret recipes with me, all except for her gravy recipe. When she died this spring, I was going through her pantry and found an entire bucket of KFC gravy mix. She was literally using KFC gravy mix as a base to make her incredible gravy. Huge scandal. LMAO. That my grandfather was an atomic soldier. Instead of sending him to fight in the Korean War, they sent him to Nevada, where, after having him turn away from the initial flash, he witnessed the mushroom cloud. After that was over, he was ordered to march to the detonation point, where he was unwittingly exposed to high amounts of radiation. Luckily for my family, my grandpa is now in his 90s, even after a few cancer scares, and the rest of us, my mom, aunt, cousins, sister, and I, are cancer-free and fairly healthy, but this is medical information that we really should have known earlier. After my mom died, I found out the real story behind my parents' marriage. She came to my father's country to visit some of her relatives. Met my father, and after just 1 week she asked him to marry her so she could stay in the country. My father accepted because he had nothing else and his parents were pressing him to get married already. But the highlight of the story is that over some time, the two of them fell in love with each other. Their love only grew over the time and they were really happy together. My mother spent her last days very ill, and she would accept only my father by her bedside. He swears to this day that she was an angel sent from God to take care of him. I am shocked that they got married just like that, out of the blue, and ended up loving each other so deeply. I can only hope to have as good and loving marriage as they had. My dad fathered a child in high school. His side of the family knew, and my mom. We found out years after he died that we have a half-sister. Grandpa was a serious Nazi German war criminal. Due to 23andMe, my dad learned that his recently deceased father was not his biological father. It wasn't a situation related to my grandma cheating either, it was a sperm donation. So, they knew this was the case his entire life. Pretty crazy they never told him. His parents did not pass until he was 65 years old. Talk about a curveball. After I was molested by my uncle, it came out he had done this to another one of my sisters, and my family covered it up, particularly my mother. Now I know why my sister didn't like how close my uncle got to me when I was younger. My mother had a child when she was a teenager, and she had given him up for adoption to a family. After this, she went to college, got her degree, married my father, and gave birth to my 4 siblings and myself. 30 years after giving her child up for adoption, I remember her getting a phone call and immediately locking herself in her room. I was about 12 at the time. I remember feeling scared because I could hear my mom crying, but she didn't want to see anybody or talk about why she was crying. On an evening later that week, my parents sat each of us kids down and told us about my mom's past and explained that my half-brother had reached out to my mom wanting to meet her and get to know her. My dad had known ever since he and mom were dating in college, and I believe my oldest sister had been told previous to this point. But the rest of my siblings and myself and all of the in-laws on my dad's side, my grandma, aunts, and uncles etc., didn't know about this part of her past. We are fairly religious/conservative, so it was really shocking at first. My mom then flew out to the state where my half-brother lived with her sisters and met him. Both my mom and my half-brother were both very nervous about the whole thing, but by the end of their trip meeting each other, they got to rebuild a relationship. After a bit of time, we, my siblings and I, got to meet him too. Fast forwarding to now, he's since moved to our same state and we see him much more frequently. He's in all of our family pictures, we see him occasionally for holidays and birthdays, and we all see him as part of our family. We're a very close-knit and extroverted family, while he is much shyer, so at times he can be a bit more distant than we would like, but we give him his space. I know my mom stays in close touch with him, and we love it when he's able to make it for family dinners and whatnot. Back then, I was the youngest and, up till then, the only boy in my family, so I loved learning that I had an older brother. Now that I'm an adult, I sometimes get his old clothes because we're roughly the same size. He's got good taste too, so I really lucked out, huh? I love that this family secret was spilled and that we were able to welcome my brother into our family and have him in our lives. We went to my grandmother's for Christmas dinner like we did every year, and my uncle drank too much, and kind of hinted that he had an affair with my mother. A couple of months and 2 DNA tests later we found out my sister is actually his daughter. My dad never spoke to his brother again. And of course, my parents got divorced. And I needed a lot of therapy, and chocolate. Gosh, we are trash. When my sister was diagnosed with cancer and her survival chances were low, it inevitably came out that she wasn't my sister. Parents must have felt we should all know the truth just in case. She survived her treatment, and will always be my sister. Thanks for the kind words, everyone. Love. My mom and older brother are not biologically related to me. My bio mom died sometime after I was born, leaving me, my sister, and my dad behind. My brother was the one that told me. My parents never told me because they wanted to protect me from the truth, but my brother thought that was a BS reason for me to not know. I don't know if my parents know that I know the truth, but I don't want to bring it up either. My mother often had stories like, "At your age, we got up at 4 a.m. to work on the farm. After the job, we went home to have lunch with your grandfather, then we walked 10 kilometers to go to school, and when we were back, we used to work in the field in a tractor until it was 6 p.m. to go and cook dinner for your grandfather." And me like, "Yeah, but he didn't work the farm with you in the morning," and she was changing the subject. I learned in Easter that my grandfather was alcoholic, got drunk every night, didn't get up in the morning to go to work, or was in fake jobs to lie to the family and go to drink, while the children had to go in elementary school and manage a farm. Then he was in prison because he touched the neighbor's children. When he got out of prison, he took out a loan of $30,000 in my grandmother's name and ran away with the money. Then he died a few years later. My grandmother bought herself an used Ford LTD, and no one cried at the funeral. 30 years later, I learned who my grandfather was. My uncles are infamous criminals who killed multiple people. I thought they bred dogs. We found out after my grandfather died that none of his 7 children with my grandmother were his, and that they all likely had different fathers. My great-aunt had a secret kid that she adopted out before she got married. Told everybody a couple years ago while she was working on finding him. He's a great part of the family now. Found out my grandma had a baby as a teenager and was forced to give him up for adoption by my great-grandparents. 40 years later he found us. So turns out one of my cousins was actually a different aunt child, but she wouldn't raise him, so another aunt adopted him to keep him in the family. Only my mother and her siblings knew this until his biological mom was dying of cancer and they decided to reveal it. It was really shitty. Especially because he has a biological sister that was little more than a long-distant cousin. He was around 24 when this all came out. Last week I discovered that my dad died 2 years ago. And no one bothered to tell me. I'd been looking for him. He was something off a drifter and most likely had Asperger's. I'm his only child. I stumbled across his headstone on findagrave.com while digging through Ancestry. His marker was labeled Beloved Brother. My aunts and uncles are pieces of shit. I'm not hard to find. I don't even know how he died. He died alone though. VA paid for his burial. I'm not okay. My dad was a good guy. He had his demons and my mother was one of them. Our estrangement wasn't his fault. I'm my father's daughter, and I say that proudly. I'm a veteran like he was, I'm a writer like he was, and I'm autistic as well. I understand the gaps in contact. He was kind, smart, sarcastic and just a good guy. He loved baseball and metal detecting. On Find a Grave his name is Simon Leslie Wright, Jr. He died February 12, 2019. I was asked for his name so someone could leave virtual flowers. Right after my grandma passed away, we found out she had a secret son she gave up for adoption, thanks Ancestry.com. Crazy thing is, my wife just found out she has an uncle nobody ever knew about from her dad's side. Thank you 23andMe. These ancestry sites are wrecking things lol. Turns out my grandma had a secret affair and my mom is an illegitimate child. This completely shattered grandma and mom's relationship until Gran passed away about a month ago. Also apparently I'm a quarter Iranian. Uncle had tried to commit suicide over a love triangle. He survived. My 10 years older than me brother molested me when I was 2, he was 12. It came out when he was doing his AA amends and he told me. My parents knew and he knew obviously, but my other brother, sister, and I didn't know until 10 years later when my brother decided to get sober. I see a lot of stories about people finding out that who they thought was their parents weren't the people raising them, and this one is a little bit different. My dad always thought his father who raised him wasn't his bio dad and the father thought the same. He was treated terribly by his father because the father was told he couldn't have children and my father was born prematurely, but at a healthy weight. So, everyone assumed my grandmother had an affair and got pregnant with my dad. It was to the point that after my grandmother died, my grandfather failed to even mention to his new wife that he had a son and grandchild, me. Years later, my dad gets an ancestry DNA test for him and me. He find out that his dad was actually his bio dad. It was shocking and sad. Great-grandparents' 60th anniversary party at hotel ballroom with cousins/2 ND cousins who hadn't seen each other in years. My mom and I were talking to my grandfather. Mom, wow. I haven't seen Chuck, Fred, and Eclair in years. Me, no kidding. When do you think we'll get a group this big back together? Mom, Gramps' birthday is in 6 months. We'll see some people then. Me, 6 months? Isn't it his 60th? All. Gramps, huh? I never thought about that. My grandfather was 60 when he realized his parents had a shotgun wedding. I grew up in a Mexican family and have 2 younger cousins. My aunt married another Latino guy who basically looked white. The oldest child was a girl and came out looking exactly like her dad, full stop. The second was a boy and came out looking like his mom? Maybe? He was dark. Like, I'm half black and this kid is darker than me. But his mom was pretty brown as well. So we thought nothing of it. Kid looks like his mom. Well, fast forward 16 years later. They're divorced and hate each other. The daughter was always treated like a princess, the boy was rather spoiled too but very much sought out his dad's approval, which he just wasn't getting. He couldn't figure out why. He's acting out, getting in trouble, running with gangs. Boo-hoos about his dad all the time. Well, dad had enough and flat out told him, "You're not my kid. Your mom is a hoe, and I don't know who your dad is." He even was kind enough to offer up a paternity test. His mother never said shit about it. She took the ostrich approach and hoped it would go away. We know now his dad was a Pacific Islander, and while there is one who has always been a family friend for many years, he took a paternity test too and was completely cleared. So the mystery remains on who she cheated on her ex with. She says she doesn't even know. The scars on an elder family member's wrist were not from a botched suicide. They were from her mom trying to protect herself and her kids from the approaching Red Army. That was at the end of WW2 in Germany. This made it so much worse. My mother is kid number 7 of 10. My aunt, kid number 4, who was born in 1945, did her DNA and found out that she has a different father from everyone else. She was devastated. There was always rumor that there was an affair but nobody talked about it. She has so many questions but nobody's alive to answer her. My de facto uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born, with a few hiccups, has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first it was a bit scandalous, but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings' maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister, my cousin, has a daughter the same age and they're best friends, go to the same high school, totally inseparable, technically aunt and niece, huh? She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid, we're all stoked to have her in our family. Nanny I had when I was younger was actually my dad's attempted sister wife. She found out how bats hit he was and dipped. That my parents had to get married. They always told us they got married in 1961, but it was 1962, 3 months before my sister was born. What's amusing is that my father was an accountant who was insanely fast with math. Whenever he was asked how many years they'd been married, he'd be off by 1. My mother would correct him through clenched teeth and then my father would nod and agree. My wife's mother's family, in rural Iowa, had a schism within the family around inherited farmland. So growing up, when she visited grandma for 2 weeks in the summer, she never knew about second to third cousins living in that small town. My wife found out when we started using Ancestry and tracing family. Not a huge secret but interesting long-standing family feud. About a month ago, my mother-in-law's 88-year-old sister revealed on her deathbed that her husband's best friend was actually the father of all 4 of her children. Her husband was an abusive grade-A jerk by all accounts. While everyone was shocked, no one was saddened by this news. My great-grandfather didn't die of cancer. He died from complications after being shot when one of his businesses was being robbed. Maybe. He also spent a lot of time in Atlantic City. He also had a lot of partners in the Teamsters and other unions in coal country. Also, everyone called him Smiling Tony, but his name wasn't Tony. He died in the 60s, long before my time, but when my great-grandmother died 20 years ago, a very old guy showed up to the funeral in a white suit and all of the oldest people in my family kisses his hand. When I asked, no one knew who he was. My grandfather moved his family away from central PA in the late 60s and disconnected from all of this, but there it is. My dad passed away 2 years ago. He and my mom were married for 34 years. He was a good dad and husband. I have no ill memories of him. Just found out that for the middle 10 years he was living a double life and had many mistresses on the side. Now my whole childhood feels like a sham. I don't know what was real and what was fabricated. My father died I was 17. At the funeral home during a viewing a young lady and her boyfriend showed up. She was probably 2 or 3 years older than me. Nobody recognized her, so she was asked why she was there. She stated she was there to see her father. My siblings and I are naturally confused. Our mom is just standing there shaking her head. My uncles ask her to leave. She leaves crying in her boyfriend's arms. Our mother takes us to a private area and explains our father had an affair years ago and that was our stepsister. I never heard any more about her, never learned her name, have never met her. I would like to meet her and apologize for my family. Seeing her rejected and crying because she couldn't even attend a viewing for her dead father bothers me to this day, and this was over 40 years ago. My grandparents are first cousins. An uncle on the same side of the family is in prison for the assassination of a presidential candidate. Family still says he was framed and is innocent. My granddad was born out of wedlock and was raised by his auntie who already had 2 daughters. His real mom had to live in the same house as her son and pretend she was his aunt. The family have always had suspicions, but it wasn't confirmed until my granddad was 72, at which point all the family that had the truth were dead. When my dad was about 18, he got into an argument with his younger brother, my uncle, bit of a dick now, about 15 at the time, ended the argument by telling my dad that his dad wasn't his biological father. He confronted my nan and the truth came out. The worst part was the whole village knew but not my dad. Mad respect for my granddad though, he married a woman who already had a child in the 50s. Something which was quite controversial back then. This is years ago, and I only got a few rough details, but my baby mama's dad wound up getting caught in a sting trying to purchase a teenage girl. He had a separate apartment all set up, transferred the funds, and when he went to the delivery meet, was arrested by the feds. I found out when I was 12 that my dad wasn't my biological father. I was around 14 when I learned my aunt's deceased husband used to abuse her. I was around 18 when I learned my mother had told my dad's mom that my grandfather molested her and my aunts. Also, my grandfather was my mom's dad. My mom told my dad's mom about it, who told me after my mom passed. My dad's friend committed suicide by shooting himself in the head in front of my dad and some other friends when he was 15 years old. They were all hanging out at the friend's house having a good time, when he went upstairs, grabbed his father's pistol, and came back down calling everyone's attention. He then put the gun to his head, squeezed the trigger, and collapsed behind a couch. They all thought it was some sort of sick joke at first, until they looked over the couch and saw his body in the blood. I first heard this story from my mom when I was 18, which explained some of my dad's behavior towards toy guns when I was a kid, but I never brought it up to him. I just hoped that one day he would open up to me about, and eventually he did, but we haven't talked about it since then. I'm amazed how my dad turned out to be such a great man having to experience something awful like that at such a young age, but according to him it's something that never left him either. He still has nightmares about it and get really uneasy in movies and TV shows when they show someone getting shot in the head. Not really a family secret. This happened in the 60s or 70s. One of my mom's second or third cousins shot and killed his father. The father was a raging alcoholic and very abusive to his wife and the son, especially when he was drunk. The father came home drunk one night, started abusing the mom, and son had had enough and shot his father, killing him. The guy spent a few years in prison for maybe manslaughter or something. I think he lives a fairly normal life now. My dad was married before he married my mom, and I have a sister out there that nobody speaks about or will answer any questions. My maternal great-grandmother did not like Norwegians and went to her deathbed insisting she was full-blooded Swedish. My father is half Norwegian, so he and my mom got a lot of flack from her. It was mostly in good fun, but it could get to my dad. After she passed, my grandfather, her son, revealed that she was a quarter Norwegian. So my father, the half-breed, was no more Norwegian than her own father. My great-grandmother wasn't actually Mexican but rather was adopted by a Mexican family from a Chinese family who was being kicked out of Mexico when railroad construction was over. She always had more typically Asian features but only spoke Spanish and it was never really questioned. 23andMe is a hell of a thing. When I was 5 years old, 1988, Santa Claus left a Nintendo on our front porch. It was wrapped in newspaper, and my parents had no idea who gifted it to us. My dad, particularly, tried to figure it out. He was always suspicious that it had been a family friend. It was by far the best gift of the year, and we played it all the time throughout our childhood. My dad died in 2004. Last Christmas, my mom explained that she was the one who had bought it and surreptitiously placed it on the porch. My dad really liked to be in control of things and had forbidden the purchase. She knew better. She didn't tell a soul for 30 years. Thanks, Mom. Found out that one of my cousins was really my aunt. My maternal grandmother married my grandfather. My grandfather slept with my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt. My great-aunt gave birth to my cousin/aunt. I tried to keep the explanation short. I was 35 when my mother finally admitted to me that she'd been lying about who my birth father was. She waited until after I'd reached out to his other children and we all thought we were siblings. He later confirmed I wasn't his. She refused to tell me who my biological father really was. My mom cheating on my dad with my now stepfather. My parents divorced when I was really young, about 1 year old, so I don't remember anything about that. When I would ask as a curious kid why they split up, both said that they just fell out of love. I already had a feeling that this was not true because through my grandma I knew the divorce was in 1996, but my mom and stepfather started dating in 1995. On my 18th birthday my stepfather confessed to me in private that they had an affair all that time ago and he still feels awful, because he feels like he broke up that family. I told him that all is fine, because everyone is happy now and I already kinda knew it. Some years later my stepmother told me that my mom actually kicked out my dad without telling him why. She just needed a break. Remember, she just had a newborn and my dad could barely see me at the beginning. My dad later found out through the landlord that my stepfather had moved in. In the house my dad rented with his wife where his newborn daughter was living with a stranger. To this day I don't know how my dad managed to overcome this without starting a huge fight. I never talked with my parents about it. Just once when my mom was having a rant about a neighbor who left her husband for another man, I told her to stop throwing rocks while sitting in a glass house. I hope you know what this saying means. She definitely does. Find out, around when my dad turned 60 he had an older sister. Found a whole slew of cousins we never knew. Till I was 15 I thought I was my father's first biological kid. Found out at 15 by reading some old letters he had written to my mother that he actually had a biological daughter born years before me with another woman. The woman wouldn't allow him in the girl's life if they didn't get married, and he didn't want to be with the woman. He marries my mother, woman's new BF/husband adopts girl, and they forget about the whole thing for 20-ish years. I was pissed when I found out. Turns out both the woman and my half-sister became meth heads though, so we kinda dodged that bullet. I apparently have an older sister that lives on the other side of the country. I tried talking about it with my family and they said I was airing dirty laundry. I'm just like, a human fucking being isn't dirty laundry. Mom's uncle hanged himself in the basement. Family, kids, found him. This is kind of messed up, but my parents told me my mom had a bad back because I pushed on her spine during birth. This was what I thought all my childhood. I think I was in my teens when my older brother told me my dad pushed my mom during an argument and she fell and had to have surgery. And #X200B. I thought I ruined my mom's back my entire childhood and those SOBs let me believe it, sad face. Every part of my family has issues with substance abuse that we just kind of ignore. My dad has 2 brothers, one's an alcoholic and the other smokes massive amounts of pot, which is fine because at least he isn't doing hard drugs anymore. My mom's sister and her husband, and maybe my cousin/their son, do coke. Grandma was an alcoholic. My dad's sister was an alcoholic. 2 or 3 of my cousins are alcoholics. My dad was an alcoholic. My grandmother was my grandfather's babysitter for his first wife. My grandpa grew up in London and was a Chelsea fan. When he moved to Leeds when he was in his 30s, around the 1950s, he switched allegiances to Leeds United. Sometimes I lay awake at night and wonder if I could have been what I hate. Oh, and my uncle killed someone. I was the secret. I was adopted, always knew it and was fine with it. Did an ancestry test this year and got matched with some second cousins and an uncle. Turns out my bio dad had severe schizophrenia, was in a home his whole life and died 3 years ago, and somehow no one knew I existed, besides my bio grandparents on my paternal side who died a few years ago. My grandfather actually just learned this before his death in 2017. He was given his middle name after his mother's father, and he had always signed his name proudly with his middle initial. Shortly before he died, he learned that his own grandfather had gone missing for a decade of his life. Turns out he was in prison for raping his daughters, excluding my great-grandmother, who was the oldest. My great-grandmother knew about this and passed along her father's name to her son anyway. My grandfather didn't get the chance to legally drop his middle name before he died, but he stopped signing with his middle initial. I was planning to pass down my grandfather's middle name to one of my children, but I never got the chance and regretted it. I'm glad I didn't. Now my grandfather was a good man, but I don't care to pass down anything like that. My parents used to grow weed in the basement when my siblings were little. I was a baby at the time, or possibly not born. The secret came out when my dad sent a photo of my sister standing happily in front of a bunch of weed plants. She asked about it in an email, but he ignored it. My dad told me all about it though. Apparently he was between jobs and was visiting family in California. One of his family members was growing it. So he ended up getting some cuttings and brought them back to New York. He hooked up some electrical wire so he could steal electricity off the power line without being detected, and so there wasn't a large power bill for the lights. They grew weed and tomatoes, which they told the kids what everything was. He'd sell it in bulk to some guy at an airport he flew at recreationally. He used that money to move to a new state and start a business there. That my German niece's daughter was never adopted from Somalia. She is her actual biological daughter. Yes, she got a bit too drunk and friendly with a refugee one night in Switzerland. I only just recently heard about this, but my grandmother had gotten a little drunk with my dad and brother a month or so ago and started talking about our great-uncle Ferber, not sure on the spelling, but from what I heard he apparently killed quite a few people and buried them on some family-owned land in a swamp. Toothbrush stupendous judicious desert pause heavy soup person apparatus hospital. My parents retired about a year and a half ago and suddenly became the most open potheads of all time. Like showing off their joint rolling abilities to me and everything. I'm in my 30s and never knew they smoked the devil's lettuce until the day my dad retired. It suddenly makes sense why they didn't punish me too bad when they caught me smoking. For me, this was a happy family secret to be spilled. Growing up, my twin cousins and I always played at the family reunions and weddings. I asked why their dad was never there and they talked about their dad being out of town all the time because he was a plumber. I was little so I had no idea plumbers don't usually travel out of town for work. About 15 years later I saw my uncle and twin cousins at a wedding after never really seeing him much before. However, there was something very militant about his behavior. I mentioned it to my grandma in passing that he had pretty crazy posture and was quite serious for a plumber. She looked at me bewildered and laughed at me. And that's when I learned Uncle Jeff is retired CIA face with tears of joy family alias, plumber. My grandpa's death is ruled as a suicide in the 50s and my mom was likely the last to see him alive when she was 5 years old. My family was still insisting he accidentally fell asleep with the car running while the garage was closed when I learned about it. My uncle wasn't just being affectionate. He's been arrested 4 times now for child photos. Including some of my cousins. I always had an Aunt Candy. I never knew why we called her that when her real name was Karen. Turns out Candy was a prostitute and my uncle was her #1 customer. They later married and she kept the name Candy for some odd reason. That my great-uncle, by marriage, I'm not blood related, was a drunk and abuser. He abused his kids and his wife, and rarely had a job. If not for my grandmother, chances were my cousins would have starved because way back in the 60s and 70s, they were elite. To go to welfare and admit he was such a colossal dick would have been catastrophic to the family reputation. They were also hardcore Catholics, so no divorce. So my grandmother bought her sister and niece and nephew food, hosted all the holidays, for years. After she passed away, my great-aunt wanted nothing to do with us, probably because of that secret. My aunt had a boyfriend that was 10 years older than her but lied about his age. Then she got pregnant, aborted the baby, then my grandma was super mad about that. She's very pro-life, and now my grandma and aunt don't talk anymore and she's best friends with the man who got her pregnant. My mom and dad were addicted to crack before they had me. My mom did crack while pregnant with me. My grandmother had an affair with the gynecologist who delivered my dad. We found some of the letters they exchanged years after she died. The best part? His name was Dr. Tactile. I found out a couple of months ago that my dad, technically stepdad, had molested my older siblings and cheated on my mom constantly. It's been very hard as he has never been anything but good to me, but I don't know if I can ever speak with him again. My mom passed a little over a year ago and he is taking it very hard, which I feel for him for, but I just can't get over all the horrible shit he did. Only time will tell how this ends up. For now it is just a real fucking bummer. My father, now slowly succumbing to Alzheimer's, has always been considered a hard case as people called it growing up in New Zealand. He has many quirks, and in the 90s as I grew up people didn't have words to describe to me why how was different. It was known that he had epilepsy, a fairly short temper, and an incredibly literal take on things. He is, in short, a hard man to know at times. It was only in the last decade have we begun to unravel his story. Due to living in the South Island without a lot of money, we didn't see our extended family much growing up, so there wasn't much of an opportunity to ask questions as I became a teenager. Originally, it was claimed that Dad had been out in the sun too long as a child and had serious sunstroke that triggered a change in him. Before that time, he's been a fairly normal child. But over the years, another story came out. Dad had dived into a swimming pool and hit his head hard, causing a change. But finally, about a decade ago, after my step-grandmother passed, the truth floated to the surface. My grandfather was a man deeply affected by World War II. He had served in the infantry in Egypt, and the experience changed him. My memories of him are of a jolly man with a temper when he was pushed, growing grumpier each time I saw him. Anyway, he had returned from the war an angry man, working as a laborer best I can tell, marrying my grandmother, who passed when my dad was 12. When my dad was a teenager, after years of tough upbringing, did something that made my grandfather snap. Dad has always been a smartass, and knows how to needle people. In response, my grandfather beat the shit out of him. Blood was coming out of his ears. And that was how he changed. Recently we've established he's unlikely to be on the spectrum, but his behavior is consistent with a traumatic brain injury. His whole life has been affected by the actions of his father. For my part, I've resolved to not repeat my father and grandfather's patterns of anger for my children, and now I reflect on how the legacy of World War II affected my father through his father. That ends with me. I just found out I have a half-brother that's 2 years old. Apparently my great-grandmother was a baby seller. On her deathbed my wife's great-grandmother, Texan, descended from German immigrants, grabbed her daughter's hand and told the room, "We're Jewish," then died. Appeared that everyone in the room decided that they didn't hear it. The story was buried for a decade before being discussed. 1 week before my younger sister's wedding, my dad decided to call myself, both my sisters, and my mother, his ex-wife, to meet at his house for something very important he needed to tell us. We all thought he had cancer or something. We were very worried. Once we were all there, he sobbingly confessed to having a 5-year-old son living in the town next to ours, which means the kid was conceived and born while my parents were still married. He claimed he didn't know for sure that the kid was his, and he had only recently gotten a DNA test. He showed us a picture of our half-brother. He looks exactly like my dad. My mother was devastated. My grandma had a daughter she gave up for adoption before she married my grandpa and had their 4 kids. The daughter found my family through distant cousins or something and my grandpa was like, cool. More family. But my grandma wants nothing to do with her and told my mom and aunt that they aren't to contact the daughter until she dies. It's my wife's family, but it goes like this. A great-aunt was one of the family's only survivors of the Holocaust back in WW2. Other than her, were her brother and sister, one of which grew up to be my wife's grandparent. I can't remember which. I never met them. The siblings were much younger then. So, they didn't remember much. Well, the great-aunt ends up writing a book about her experience fleeing the country to escape the Nazis. In it, she details the death of several family members during a march through a blizzard. Real dramatic stuff. Well, it turned out many years after her death later, my wife's dad gets a letter from one of the dead relatives. It turns out the great-aunt didn't like the 2 family members who died in her book. They had just parted ways at some point during the escape. She wrote them out of the family in her book and took the secret to her grave. Fortunately, their last name is very unique in the world, because of how many of them didn't survive the Holocaust. So, once the dead relatives started searching the US, they popped up right away. This happened about 3 years ago, I think. Hungarian grudges are legendary. This comment will get buried, but here goes. We were always told that my uncle was a liar and a conman. Per the family, he was out there swindling people by faking expertise/degrees and getting engineering contracts that he had no means to deliver on. They told us he was an awkward loser that left home around 18 because he didn't fit in with the family for vague reasons, generally centered on being crippled by insecurity about his looks and/or career prospects. As it turns out, he was gay. He left because the family treated him awfully because of it. He wasn't conning people, rather he had opened a successful gay bar in another city. The gay bar used the family name as the moniker. The family made up a story, so they didn't have to tell people that he left because they were awful and he was better off for having done it. I got a list. Grandma was a lesbian. Older family members spilled the beans about the real reason for her sudden divorce in a conversation the night my mom died, but I'd had suspicions before that. She shared a bedroom with the same woman from the time she divorced till the day she died. Had also been told her ex-husband was a huge liar, had never served in any military ever other than as a volunteer bus driver for the VA in the 90s. Found a bunch of telegrams clearing out stuff after Dad died. They were from various European locations via the US Army to my grandma, talking about missing her and when he'd be back stateside. Was also told great-grandfather, same side, was a giant of a man and towered over the rest of the family. His immigration papers, found around the same time as the telegrams, and dated at least a decade later than we'd always thought he came to the US, put him squarely at 5 feet 7 inches. His wife was a 6-foot-tall woman, according to various hospital paperwork we found. Both were sadly long gone before I came along. Mom wrote a suicide note sometime in the mid-80s. I found it about a month after the previous ones. I'm the only one that knows about this one in the family, and honestly see no reason and have no desire to tell any of the rest. She obviously changed her mind, and showing/reading it to literally anyone else mentioned would bring harm to them and no peace to me. And what I knew about most of my life that no one else still living did, my mom was pregnant 9 times. She only had 2 kids, but had they all lived/been carried to term, we would have been \2 and \10 of them all, cause one was apparently twins. And the first would have had a different father cause she was married for a year in the late 60s before she met my dad. My aunt had been poisoning my grandma just so that she can pay back $60,000 owed to the IRS. How she got into debt is beyond me, but my aunt forced my grandmother to swallow larger pills that were over her recommended dosage. My grandmother passed away. We're too trashy to have secrets. We act a fool right out in the front yard. Fuck you Luke and Annette, Susan. Did a 23andMe test and got my results in December. Found 3 half-siblings. Turns out I'm donor conceived and had no clue for almost 26 years. Woman shrugging. We found out my papa had a gambling problem and put my gram in a lot of unknown debt when he passed away. I'm talking secret home liens, unpaid taxes, the works, and my gram had zero idea of any of it. Thankfully all of their kids are well off and were able to pay it off for her and set her up for life, but she had a hard time coping for a while. My dad molested at least 7 children. One was an exchange student. My heart is broken. Those children. I hurt so much for them and what he did to them. I am so angry at him. That my uncle was married for 10 years, when we read his wife's book obituary in the newspaper. He never mentioned getting married, and he hasn't mentioned her passing since. We always knew that he liked his privacy, but dang. Oh man. I got a gooder. My aunt met a fellow in Germany and after some conversation found out that they had grown up in the same small town in Canada. The world is after all, a small place. So they keep going further down this childhood rabbit hole until realize that this guy is actually my aunt's long-lost half-brother. As it turns out, my grandparents had a bit of a polyamorous throuple going on shortly after they immigrated in the 50s, but around the time my aunt was 6 the whole thing fell apart and the third partner took her kid, cut off all contact and apparently moved to Germany. Rather than explaining things to their remaining 3 young children, my grandparents opted to tell them that there had been a terrible car accident and that the other mom and son had died. And so my aunt and her sisters mourned and went on with their lives with vague memories of another brother and aunt who had died when they were very young, until my aunt met him in a bar in Hamburg 36 years later. We recently found out that around 40 years ago my grandfather had a 7-year-long affair with a woman in his church who was also married. During this time he had 2 children with this woman and they never told anyone about. She pretended that those 2 children were that of her husband despite them not looking anything like him. How we found out was rather interesting. A couple years ago I had gotten one of the 23andMe DNA kits to figure out what my ethnic background looked like. My aunt and uncle had done the same about a year ago as well. Once you get your results from 23andMe, it also will show you any DNA matches you have with relatives. A couple days after Christmas, a woman had reached out to my aunt and uncle asking to speak with them because 23andMe was telling her that they were her half-siblings and that I was showing up as her nephew. Coming from a very strict Catholic family, this was very confusing and concerning to her. They ended up meeting and pieced together everything and then approached their parents about it, who at first denied it, then came clean about the affair. It's been pretty hard on the family. For the longest time my grandfather was too stubborn to even apologize to the family and my grandmother for all the pain he's brought, but he finally did. Shockingly enough my grandparents are still together despite all of this coming to light. Ever since I was younger my grandmother on my mom's side would always behave strangely at dinner. If you were looking at a dinner menu, she would see what entree you were looking at and say, "Well, that sounds good. Can I split that with you?" Same thing with appetizers, drinks, literally everything. "Hey, wanna try my soda?" It always struck me as odd and somewhat annoying because I don't like splitting food. She would creepily watch as you ate your food and didn't take a bite of hers until you swallowed yours. She became estranged from my family several years ago for a multitude of reasons: gambling, asking for money, harassment, and her overall past history of abuse against my mom when she was growing up. I then asked my mom why my grandma always behaves so strange at dinner. Well, turns out my grandma is paranoid that her food will be poisoned. She refuses to take a bite of food or drink until someone else tested it first. It creeps me out to think that she theoretically thought the food was poisoned and had me try it to make sure it wasn't. Waiting intently to make sure I didn't drop dead or have some sort of reaction after taking a bite. Love you too, Grandma. When I was 13 my mom told me I was adopted cause I got caught smoking weed. She wasn't planning on really telling me at all. That shit was so fucked up tbh. My uncle was chopped to death by his sister with an axe. In the early 80s my uncle spent a lot of time and money training to become a commercial pilot. My grandparents, his folks, secretly tore up all application responses/documents and had the family doctor red flag him to airlines as having bad nerves and psychotic tendencies. They sabotaged his career fearing he'd die in a plane crash. He was an air steward till retirement.